Hey everybody, this is Court Jones here for the final student critique for the Caricature course. This critique is on the final lesson on shape design and features. The point of this lesson is to really focus on how to separate yourself as a student from a professional, or to move from the student level to a more intermediate or professional level. What I wanted to instill in everybody with this final lesson is that there's the next level that you need to move to is consciously controlling the shapes that you design in a way that is representative of your particular style or your voice and what you see, of course, in the reference. So a lot of times you'll get a photo reference that isn't ideal, or it's, the lighting isn't great, or it's not exactly clear what's going on with the shape or with the way a plane changes from a front plane to a side plane. It's up to the artist to redesign those shapes in a way that's not only accurate and true to the subject, but also has some artistic merit, has some sense of design or personality to it. So we'll actually redesign some of the shapes in a way that's more decisive. Sometimes edges get harder, sometimes edges get softer between two shapes. And how you play with those edges, how you play with those shapes is what is going to determine your style as an artist. So we're going to take a look at some student work, and I'll go over at the end, I think, what a lot of the problems in common were. So with that, let's just dive in and see what we can find. Okay, and here we have Alan Davis's caricature of politician Nancy Pelosi. I think you got a great likeness here, Alan. It's structured pretty well overall. I like the symmetry, the balance, the perspective's pretty good, the expression's good, it reads well, it looks like her. Where you're at in your development, I think, is just that at this lesson where you need to push yourself a little further, learn how to design more cleanly, have more control of your values and your edges, and basically redesigning the shapes in a more deliberate way. One of the things I notice about your sketch here is that it feels kind of, well, the values are sort of spotty all over the face, where maybe it's a bit too much contrast and it could be smoothed out a bit. She looks too sunken in places and bloated in others, basically just like a mass, like a messy mass of volume everywhere because of all the streaky contrasting values, or like she has dirt or smudges on her face. I think part of your problem was actually, though, this photo reference you chose. While it is a good likeness of Miss Pelosi, the lighting is not fantastic. It's sort of soft lighting, kind of coming from the upper left, but there's weird places where it's hitting on the face and it's not super clear. There's not like obvious places where you would model it like a simple egg, where it's light going into dark. It's just spots of light and dark everywhere, and I could see how that influenced or maybe confused you during the painting process. Here's a photo I found of her that actually I like a lot better. Now she's, I think, a little older in this other photo here, but I love the lighting in this. The halftones are good, they're in a nice middle range, there's clear highlights, there's clear shadows. It makes it really easy on the artist to figure out what to do with this and how to model these forms. You gave yourself a really tough challenge with this photo on the right here. I would look for more like photos on the left that have one strong light source, good strong shadows. Not that you always have to do that in art or in caricature. Sometimes you'll have a photo of your subject and it's the perfect expression and angle, but the lighting's terrible and you just have to work with it. That's for a bit later on, I think. For right now, focus on using reference that's going to make it easier on you so you can figure out how you will express yourself through values and through edges. But anyway, I'll go back to what you did with your photo and see what I can do to improve upon that. So I think what I'll do is I'll just take a section of the face and redesign it, like perhaps the nose and the eye, and we'll see what happens here. So I'm just going to sample colors and values, well, the values because it's black and white, from your original photo. And before I do that, I think I'll actually paint over the areas that are in question, and I'll redesign some of the shapes and redraw them. I won't obscure them entirely because I do like the shapes that you have. I'm just going to, it'll just make me easier to do the overdrawing on top of them if it's dimmed down just a bit here. So I'll just take the upper right portion of the face here and focus on that. Okay, I just switched over to a pencil brush here. I think this is Kyle Webster's animator pencil. Just gonna sample a dark color and sort of just redesign the shapes you have in a more deliberate way, making straighter, making curves curvier and more graceful. Thinking about where the lines are thin and where they're going to be thicker, and I am going over pretty much what you got, because it is good. I like what you got there, but just needs a little bit more refinement. And that's a good place to be. You actually shouldn't be ashamed. It's good where you're at right now, where you just need sort of help with the more subtle parts of the picture. So as I'm redrawing this feature here, this eye, I'm trying to make it really clear for myself where, say, the thickness of the eyelids are, how we can see inside the upper eyelid here, we can see the bottom plane of the upper eyelid, and we can see the top plane of the lower eyelid here on the bottom. Later on, if you want to obscure things or blur them out a little bit, that's okay. It's up to you. Artistically, I would just try to start out with, as clearly as you can, indicate these shapes so you can decide what to do with them, if you want to keep them clear and hard-edged and delineated, or to soften them up. Now this upper eyelid fold here, where it meets the top of the eye socket, could use a bit of redesigning to help improve the expression, where it's sort of like got this sad eye look there, which wasn't as obvious in your original. I think eyebrows are one of those things where you can have a lot of fun altering them, exaggerating them just a bit more to heighten the expression that's being had, because things like eyebrows and the mouth especially are really movable, really flexible. So you have a lot of leeway in how you interpret them. Things like the nose, which doesn't move so much, needs to feel more structured, I think, most of the time, because it's not as movable. But the eyebrows can definitely be sort of redesigned in a more active way to heighten the expression that's happening. Okay, in this picture, her head is turned to the right just a little bit, so the nose is turned to the right, and you got that just a bit, but it's not totally clear. Maybe I can actually move over the ball of the nose just a bit to the right to heighten that effect of perspective. Take a look at the original reference photo over here. You can see she has a much more upturned nose than the average person, where the top plane and the bottom plane switch right at about here, and then the bottom plane continues along the nostrils like so. That's just sort of a crude interpretation, but that's sort of what I'm seeing. And then the top plane is here, and the side planes like so. And that's a bit wonky looking, but you get the idea. If we go back over to our drawing and sort of lightly indicate those plane changes, that'll help us when we're painting this in. So this lesson, is mostly about drawing, but for the purpose of painting or shading in if you're using, charcoal or graphite. So, but you have to do this beginning stage, this planning stage, figuring out where the plane changes are and what those transitions are, and how those actually are shaped. So I'm just inserting some of my knowledge of nose anatomy in here. It's not really totally obvious from the lighting that this is what's happening, and she doesn't have strong separation of the cartilage plates, what I'm indicating here, but that's sort of what is happening. Okay, so let's switch over to a paintbrush and shade some of this in. And this is a paintbrush of my own creation. I actually made it from scratch in Photoshop. And there are tutorials on how to do that, but basically I just started with just a circle selection, and then I cut vertical slices out of it with the minus selection tool and saved that as a brush stamp. And then I made sure to align the brush stroke to the direction of the pen flow, to the direction of the pen stroke, and turned opacity on. And I just like it as a general paintbrush. It sort of simulates a natural bristly brush when you're oil painting. Has lots of cool streaks in it. Okay, I'm going to start by shading in the blackest values, because that's going to be the anchors of the drawing. It's what's going to ground it. It's what's going to help me keep track of things as I start to paint and lose the original line drawing. I want to make sure my darkest darks are in there to have as my landmarks or my reference points. So this underside of the eyebrow and nose area, the corner of the nose here, is going to be a darker value because the light is generally coming from above, but not super dark. It's not as dark, of course, as the cast shadow inside the crease of the eyelid. And if you notice, I'm actually painting in the direction of the forms, sort of like I'm cross-hatching with pen and pencil. That is a good way to paint, to help to paint along the directions that the form flows, so that you get the actual inconsistencies in the brush stroke, like the streaks, kind of help define the forms and add a little bit of texture. Because you have to make a decision, you know, when you're designing the brushstroke itself. It's not just about shapes and contours and outlines, it's about the actual physicality of the paint or of the pencil or pen that you're using. That becomes part of the statement or part of the drawing. So if you're going to choose a direction for those strokes, make those strokes in a direction that actually help and assist the viewer in understanding what the forms are doing. So a bit of a downward facing plane here at the top of the nose, or the glabella area. When painting from photos that have sort of weak lighting, I sometimes will darken the halftones, you know, if you think it's too light in the reference photo, to help the forms read a little bit more three-dimensional. So like on the underside of the cheek here, I made it a little darker than it is in the reference photo. But of course, you gotta be real careful about that. I only do it because I feel confident in, you know, manipulating form with value. If you do it the wrong way or too much in too many places, it will get that streaky, over contrasty look. But it's generally safer to do it around the sides, around the contours of a face like this, because we all sort of expect there to be a sort of a fall off from the light as it moves around to the side. Now, even down to the highlights get designed as well. In the reference photo, there's two small pinpoints of light in her eyes because there's lighting on either side of her, which is probably why there's such weak shadows on her face, because there is a stronger light source on the left, but on the right there's a sort of a fill light filling in the shadows. So I'm going to take the pinpoint highlight on the left and make that a little brighter, because that's where the light source is, the main light source. And I try to make it, you know, it can be squarish or have a bit of a, like a comet tail to it, and that helps show sort of the, oh, I don't know, it's just something I see that I do a lot in painting, that I've seen my teachers do, and I try to dissect what that is, and I think it's just the curvature of the cornea on top of the eyeball has a slightly smaller convexity to it than the larger eyeball, and it'll create, if the highlight's in the right place, it'll create sort of a big highlight transitioning into a skinnier highlight, I think is what's happening anatomically. And then the other highlight on the right will be just a little dark, a little smaller. So you don't want highlights everywhere to be too monotonous and repetitive. Okay, let's work on that nose a bit here. So my first job is to make first the forms of the nose more clear, more strongly indicated, and I'll worry about exactly that lighting situation, the highlights, just a little bit later. My first priority is to the structure and the three-dimensional quality of the nose feature. Again, I'm getting into the highlights on the nose, which are sort of overexposed and blown out, which is another reason I don't love this photo, because I don't think if we were to look at her in real life that this would be what the highlights on her nose look like, where it's so overexposed over such a large area. But I'm trying to work with what this photo is giving me here, and I just want you to be aware of that. If you do a lot of drawing and painting from life, from the live model under real lighting situations, you'll get the sense of when a photo is not good, or when it's overexposed, when it's too dark, when you should change it. That's another instance where studying portraiture or head drawing, realistic head drawing, especially from life, is super, super valuable if you want to be a caricature illustrator or a caricature fine artist, depending on whatever it is you want to end up doing. But if you want to paint at a level that looks sort of realistic and looks like it could have been done from life, where it doesn't have the trademark look of being drawn from a photo, the more you draw from life will develop your instincts and your technique for making the shapes look that way. It's really hard to do if you don't spend a lot of time with life models. Okay, it's starting to look the way I want. I just want to do a few more finishing touches, like the around the eyes, the eyebrows, maybe a little bit slightly lighter light in the eyeball. And of course the eyeball, as you correctly put here, is not pure white. It's far from it actually, but it needs to be a lighter value than the skin around it, that's for sure, in her case. Especially around the top of the eyeball here, it's going to be a bit lighter. There we go, it's feeling better. Okay, for the eyelashes, I do want to indicate them, but I don't want to use this particular brush. I'm going to get a brush that I think is more suited. Okay, and this is just a simple round brush with taper on and with opacity turned on. No fancy tricks or anything, there's no streakiness to it, but it'll give me the nice effect that I want, where it goes from thin to thick and also lightens up with lighter pressure. See how that's happening there? Although a streaky brush wouldn't necessarily be a bad idea. I just wanted to show you can do it with simple brushes. Remember, don't space the eyelashes evenly. Don't make them all the same length or the same thickness. Group them together to make them look a little bit more random and clustered. And do them after you do the structure of the eyelid, of course, because you're painting on top of that good structure. You don't want to try to paint around those delicate eyelashes. I just find it's best to do them a little bit later after you've got most of the eye already in. So there's a bit of translucency to them. They're not super intentional. They're not super thick and heavy-handed. The eyelashes you have here on the left side, they're straight, they're blocky, they don't taper. So watch for that. It looks a little clumsily handled. And some eyelashes on the bottom, they're more afterthoughts or just more wispy. So I don't want to call attention to the lower eyelashes too much. But she does have some makeup and eyeliner and mascara on probably. So on women's faces, you have to sort of take that into account. And the same goes for the hair too. You got a lot of strokes that are the same width from end to end, and when you're doing those final hairs, those flyaway hairs, or the details on top of all of the underlying structure of the hair, that's when you want to switch to a brush that has a tapered end, so you can get a little bit more of a graceful effect. So it just feels like it's growing more naturally out of the scalp that way. Anyway, so hope that was helpful, seeing me just redo a section of the face with more attention paid to the design of the shapes, making things straighter, making things more curved, heightening the expression just a little bit more, and also smoothing out the values because you had too much jumping around from lights to darks in your painting. So that was it, the last student critique of the Proko caricature course. Of course, that was just a taste of what the premium students get, and we'd go over a lot more students' work suffering from different problems in the premium version over on proko.com/caricature. Just to make the final point here, the main problem I noticed in most people's work when trying to complete this assignment was they weren't going that extra step, or spending that extra time, I guess I should say, to really refine the design to a way that was not only more specific to the likeness to that person, but in a way that's more visually appealing, just on an abstract level. So, you know, if you turn the painting upside down or flip it backwards, it should still be good looking just visually, just the balance of everything, the harmony of the placement on the page and the straights versus curves, hard versus soft. Just think about it first as an abstract design, and then that happens to look like a human face that's exaggerated. So there's a lot of variables to balance. This is pretty advanced stuff, and people were struggling with this last one, I think, because, you know, you're struggling with a lot of the fundamental skills still. Or painting is sort of new to you, or you haven't done it as much maybe as you'd like, so you're wrestling with other issues at the same time. But if you stick to a procedure of step by step, starting simply from your thumbnails to your rough sketch, abstraction, all the stuff we did in the fundamental part of the course in part 1, it'll make things a lot easier. You just break down big jobs into smaller steps, and that's the main thing about this course. It's why I designed it the way I did, to make things easier, to break up your tasks. So anyway, thank you everyone who watched and followed along. It was a real pleasure watching your development and people's enthusiasm for the course. I just couldn't have asked for, you know, better submissions. It was just great. You know, even though the pieces aren't, you know, perfect, that's not the point of this course, obviously. The point is to see this development and to watch people grow, and I really have. So thank you everybody who participated and followed along and watched my videos, and when we were goofy and tried to make you laugh, you know, to make it more palatable. We really appreciate it, and thank you all, and maybe I'll see you at some time in the future. Thanks.